Dr. Anderson to you, I have a couple of housekeeping things. So the first thing is I want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for adhering to our mask policy. And if you're not familiar with it, if you're vaccinated, you do not need to wear a mask or socially distance. If you are vaccinated, we ask you to keep your mask on and maintain a 6-foot apart distance. Certainly you can wear your mask if you feel comfortable and are vaccinated. So thank you again. Is everybody excited? It's just so good to see people. And then Dr. Anderson will present her presentation because that's what she's here to do. And afterwards, there'll be a question and answer period or a discussion. And Rhea and Kay will be our mic runners. So if you have a question, you don't need to stand up, just raise your hand. We'll come around and we'll hold the mic for you and you can ask your question or state your comment. Okay? Yes. All right, so it is my great pleasure to introduce to you, here she is, Dr. Angela Anderson, who recently flew back to Charlottesville on her first post-COVID trip to visit with friends and family. Of course, one of our members, though, Holly Heilberg, heard about Dr. Anderson's trip from one of her neighbors, and she learned of Dr. Anderson's extensive research on the areas of where we are right now, Free State, Belvedere, and Dunlora. So she asked her neighbor if Dr. Anderson would be willing to talk about her research with us, and she graciously said yes. We're thrilled that she said yes. Dr. Anderson's family traces back to these original communities, and she's currently documenting her findings in an upcoming book. Welcome also to the additional family members of Dr. Anderson who are here today. Thank you for coming. Dr. Anderson holds a Master of Science in Human Relations Management and received her Ph.D. in Organization and Management. She enlisted in the United States Air Force in 1975 and served there as both in service and as a civilian until 2019. Thank you for your service. And she had a vast array of management roles at Tinker Air Force Base and at the Pentagon. She currently teaches at Southeastern Oklahoma State University and Ashford University in Denver, Colorado, utilizing her extensive work experience and educational background in leadership, theory, diversity, organizational culture, and behavior. In her own words, Dr. Anderson enjoys bringing her expertise in leadership into the educational environment, sharing her experiences, and bringing her coursework alive. Throughout her career, she's been highly dedicated to the learning, training, and advancement of others. We are so honored to have Dr. Angela Anderson take time out with her friends and family to be here with us today, advancing our learning, and hopefully the advancement of others in her telling of the stories of the original families of Free State, Belvedere, and Dunlora, the very ground we are on today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Make sure this works. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for introducing me and allowing me to be able to come today and share a little bit of information about our family here at Free State and our long history of over 240 years of being in this area. I'm going to start off with Free State and the residents and the history here, but before I get started, I want to make sure that I acknowledge a few individuals that have helped me with the research and to make sure that I have been able to bring this information to you. I first want to acknowledge Bob Vernon, and he's a historian here in Charlottesville. So if you've not met him or you've not heard his name, he has been conducting extensive research in this area on African-American history and the history of Albemarle County and Charlottesville. And also I want to give credit to Steve Thompson, who is an archaeologist and responsible for the survey and excavation of the Dunlora and Belvedere properties, because without his information and the discoveries that he made, I would not be able to at least get some of the information available to you today. And also oral history family history coming from my dear cousin, Mary Wells, who still lives here in Free State, and my sister, Jacqueline Napper. They have been able to provide some information. And also my uncle, Philip Brown, who's now deceased. He was the family historian before me, and he had a lot of information. He's no longer here with us, but I have some of his information that I truly carry along to make sure that I tell it to you all as well. Before we get started on our let's talk about early Albemarle County. As a historian, and I always say that I'm what we call an armchair genealogist. That means that I do my research for my family, and I'm not on TV like Dr. Henry Gates or anything like that, but with my family, I can at least give you what I know and what I've been able to find out. So we're going to talk about early Albemarle County to sort of set the stage. And we're going to talk about the Daily Progress article because that also put a public awareness on Free State. We're going to talk about the 1788 land purchase. Amy Bowles Farrell, which you see the sign as you're walking through Free State, you see her name up there and you're probably wondering who she is and where she came from. Also, I'm going to talk about the 1833 colonization census and why that's important. And I'm going to share with you about Dunlora and the Bowles lot and how those interconnect. And some of the stories about families and lifestyles here in the Free State area. And present day, all of you are familiar with the present day because you currently live here or you are familiar with Belvedere and with Free State and Dunlora. I also have some books up here that I brought as I call it my show and tell. Before we get started, this book I was able to get from the Albemarle County Historical Society, and it has such rich information in it that I use it constantly, and I've been able to find a lot of my family members in here. Also, before, or in 2017, excuse me, I put together this book, and you guys are free to look at it after the presentation, but I put it together of our family history. It's a private book, and it shows all of my family. So it's not for sale, but the one that I'm currently working on will be for sale probably by the end of the year or so. But you're free to take a look at that as well. Some of my family members have it. The rest of them won't be able to get it because unfortunately, the platform that we were using is no longer available. Okay, I would like to be able to talk about early Albemarle County. And in the area of Albemarle County, the Monosakapa, which you see over here in the far right top corner of the Monacan village, they were a Native American group that lived here around the early 1600s, and they settled along the north route 29 north along the South Fork Rivanna River. This trade route was used basically as an ability for them to be able to transfer goods and services to Richmond and Appalachian Mountains. The hunting path is now what we call Route 250. Route 250, the main point of interest about the Route 250 is that it runs actually 514 miles from Sandusky, Ohio to Richmond, Virginia. I don't know if anybody knew that, but that is quite an extensive area. But the main area about 250 that is in this area is the route that runs in western Albemarle all the way to what we call Pantops Mountain. So you've got an extensive area. Route 250, you probably see it. You see 29, you see 250. They're sort of synonymous with one another. So one of the good things about it is that that area is definitely a benefit for you, and the history there is very rich. What is also significant about this is that in the 1730s, Major Thomas Carr, he patented as much as 10,000 acres of the area of land around the Rivanna River and the Southwest Mountains. And that parcel of land was granted to him by King George II. And you know that England was, had control over the colonies back in the 1700s. So everybody, you paid to the crown, you gave that, you had to get permission from the king to get anything done in the Virginia colonies during that time. When Albemarle was founded in 1744, the original county encompassed Amherst County, Buckingham, Nelson, Fluvanna, Appomattox, Campbell County, and I even had to look up Campbell County. Does anybody know where Campbell County is located? Okay, right outside of Lynchburg. So, I mean, that was a little bit of a history knowledge nugget for me, because I'm thinking I've never heard of Campbell County. And so the thing is that Albemarle assumed its current boundaries in 1777, so that's where we are today. The remains of the Monosakapa village is now buried beneath the floodplains of the Rivanna River, and this has been documented basically, number one, by John Smith in his 17th century map that he put out, and this is the map of the region that he had, and also Thomas Jefferson documented in his Virginia Notes when he did the excavation in 1784. And why this is important to us is because, as you'll see as I go through the presentation, one of the witnesses in Amy Farrell's will was a woman named Usley Tuppence, and that is a name that is related to the Native Americans that lived in this area. So you'll see that during that time that Amy was living in this area and that we had the Bowles Lot and Dunlora, we still had Native Americans that were still residing in this area. This is an article that was put in the Daily Progress in 1955. They published this short article, and Boyce Loving was the editor at the time that wrote this article. This gentleman that you see here is my great uncle, John Spears, and he and Mary Moon, whose family owned the Dunlora lot, they gave the interview to Boyce Loving. Now, some of this information is okay, but not all of it is correct. As you know about history, from history, there's so much to talk about, but one good thing about it is that it's from somebody else's perspective. So they will tell you what they need you to know or what they know themselves, but the rest is what you have to find out on your own. So my uncle basically gave this information, and he had talked about that some of the land that was given was from free slaves that was given from the Dunlora plot. That is not true. And I'll explain a little bit more about it. But one of the most important things about this is that through this article in 1955, even though this area was known as Free State, this put a public awareness on Free State. And to think about it, it's been in existence for more than 167 years when Lovings wrote this article in 1955. So that means that there was people still here working and living in Free State. And it basically was one of those hidden nuggets. When you go across the wooden bridge, and I know lots of you probably seen that wooden bridge, when you go across the wooden bridge, you're in another community. When I was growing up, when we were growing up, pretty much once you came across the bridge, that was it. You were in another place. It was not the same as being in Charlottesville. So it was sort of like, I call it the place that time forgot. It was very rural during that time. And so it was interesting because now it's so grown up, I almost have to use my GPS to get here. This is about the earliest written record of the land that will become Free State began around 1738 with a land grant that was given to Charles Mormon by King George. That was for 200 acres of land at that time. The 200-acre tract was around in this area, as you can tell. Right here, you see Amy Farrell, and I'll talk about Charles Barnett in a minute, and over here on this side, you'll see Dunlora and Belvedere that belong to the Carrs. In 1787, though, well, I'll start with Charles Mormon. Charles Mormon received the land, but what happened is that he basically sold it, or when he passed away, his will was probated, and the land was assumed or brought by William Johnson. William Johnson sold the land to Charles Barnett in 1787. He sold him 40 acres of land for 15 pounds. Now, 15 pounds in today's dollars is about 900 bucks. That's quite a You know, $900 in those times would have been a lot of money. But he sold this portion to Charles Barnett. And why is Charles Barnett so important? Because he was the son-in-law of Amy Farrell. He married Amy's daughter, Lucy. And when William Johnson sold that property to him, a year later, he sold the 224 acres of land to Amy Farrell for 100 pounds. In today's dollars, 100 pounds is about $26,000. And so you probably wonder where she got that money during that time, because $26,000 or 100 pounds in the 1700s is quite a bit of money. But she was able to manage, and it's also known or thought that she probably lived in Dunlora area before she purchased the land, at least a decade before she was sold the land by William Johnson. And some of the evidence that I've been able to uncover proves that she was here as early as 1782. Okay, I'm going to the next slide. The residents in this area during this time were mainly free people of color. I can't tell you that every single one of these individuals I know, because I don't, but the Hawkins was also free people of color. They owned that land, and the lots, actually, I am not sure about Peter Lot, but I do know that one of my great-grandmothers, Ellen Lot, was married to my great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Brown, and I'll explain a little bit about that too. This is Amy Bowles Farrell's will. Excuse me, I thought I had something before that. No. In her will, oops, give me 1 second, I am so sorry. I'm skip the slide here, give me a second. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, it looks like it locked up on me. Let me try to. Sorry. You guys don't want to see that. No problem with it. See if I get this back. Somewhere along the line, it's just froze up. Huh? Yeah, it froze up on me. Okay, try it again. Let's try this. Okay, see if I. There we go. Okay. We are back in business. Sorry about that. So let's talk about Amy. Who is Amy Farrell? She was born in between 1730 to 1735. We don't have exactly when, but we know that it was about that time. Now, Amy was born as an indentured servant. She lived in Louisa County, and she served her indentured servitude for 31 years. She was an illegitimate, as they say, and pardon my French, bastard child, as they called it back then. I think they really wanted to put that out to intimidate the women who had illegitimate children. But she was also, the other part of that, as a mulatto, she was born to a Christian white woman. In 1705, actually in 1691, Virginia had a law that any child, illegitimate child that was born to a female servant or any free white woman be delivered to the parish warden and bound out for 31 years. In 1691, it was 30 years. In 1705, it moved to 31 years. And then in 1730, I believe in the I think in 1731, it went to 18 years for women and 21 for men. So that was still quite a long time to be bound out and serving as an indentured servant. Also, how we know that she was an indentured servant was because in 1778, Jane Bowles, who was one of Amy Bowles' daughters, was a free mulatto woman, and she brought a suit against the Mickeys. But James Mickey had died, and she was no longer in their care, and she wanted to be free from being an indentured servant. So she filed a lawsuit in Louisa County, and in 1779, the court ordered that she be released. But Amy, meanwhile, had moved out of the city, out of Louisa County. One of the note things about this is that when she was also bound to a couple named John and Mary Williams, and they moved to Georgia, and they sold her indentured servitude to the James Mickey family. So, but Amy did her time, and then she moved out of Louisa County, probably to Albemarle during that time. But Jane Bowles was still as an indentured servant, and when she filed a lawsuit, it's recorded in the Louisa County documents that it showed that she had identified Amy as her mother. So what basically happened is that she was released and freed from her indentured servitude. Amy moved out of Louisa County, and she married a man named Thomas Farrell. She and Thomas Farrell probably were married somewhere between 1767 and 1770, and they had one son. But Amy also had about 6 children that she brought to the marriage when she married Thomas Farrell. And all of those children were named Bowles. And I'll show you the little family tree that I put together to kind of give you a little bit of a visual history of exactly who these individuals were. In 1778, though, Thomas Farrell died. And in his will, he mentions Amy, and he also mentions Thomas and 3 other of the Bowles stepchildren, Katie, Susie, as well as, I believe it was Zachariah. Yes. Oh, no, it's Susie, Zachariah, and Martha, excuse me. How we know that Amy also was released from her indentured servitude is that she was taxed on livestock in the Fredericksville Parish. During that time, there were 2 parishes, Fredericksville Parish and St. Anne's Parish. But she was taxed on livestock during that time as early as 1782. But she died in 1797, and she left in her will those 224 acres to her son Zachariah Bowles and to Thomas Farrell. In the history recordings, as you know, a lot of times the names that we may have up here are not exactly what we have when you do research. Farrell may have been spelled F-A-R-R-A-R or F-A-R-O-W with dropping 1 R, or Farrell like the King Farrell, and there were just different names, but they all related. And Bowles was not exactly B-O-W-L-E-S, it was B-O-L-L-S or B-O-L-S or whatever they felt like they heard, and so that's what they wrote. I'm serious. Sometimes we are like that, aren't we? So now we'll go to Amy Farrell's will. This is a copy of Amy's will, and as you can see right here, that is her mark. Amy could not read or write, so her mark is here, but she also had witnesses here that documented that this was her will. And as you can see at the very bottom is the lady Elsley Topence, and that was an indication that that was probably a Native American individual that still lived in this area. Even though Amy divided her land between her 2 sons, Zachariah Bowles and to Thomas Farrell, Thomas kept it for a minute, but then he sold it. He basically took his money and ran. Zachariah kept his land, and he lived and worked on the land. So I'm going to go to the 1833 colonization before I go back to Zechariah, because in between Amy dying and leaving her children in her will, we also had some things in history that happened before Zechariah died. After Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, the Virginia Assembly passed a legislation to persuade African Americans to go to Africa, specifically Liberia. And the reason why Nat Turner had caused this or made this happen is because when he had his rebellion in 1831, mainly he massacred about between 55 and 60 people, and most of them were white people. And so it put a fear in them. And in 1833, the court ordered the county commissioners to conduct a census of all free blacks and ascertain if they were willing to immigrate to the western coast of Africa. And you got to remember that between 1619 to 1833, quite a few years have passed, like 214 years have passed. And note that by that time, everybody that had been living in the United States that were born of African descent were basically born in America. They were not born in Africa. And so a lot of the people there said, I have no idea about Africa. I've never been there. That's not where I'm from. And of the free blacks that lived in Albemarle County during that time, in the Fredericksville Parish and the St. Anne Parish, the majority of them refused to take that opportunity to go back. Some of them did. None of our family members did. And during that time in the Fredericksville Parish, the majority of the residents that were living here were the Bowles, the Butlers, and the Coles. You can see over here on the magazine of Albemarle County history, that is actually in this book, but the actual 1833 census is located in the Library of Virginia. And that is where the whole article is, and you can get it. But if you can see, and probably in the little wording, you can see it says Bowles, little tiny ones, because by that time, that's who basically lived in this area. Because Amy had 5 or 6 children, they basically lived in this particular area, and they had their children as well. The one good thing about this that I use as a reference is in here, every single individual that was free in the parish of Fredericksville Parish and St. Anne's Parish was documented. And also, not only were they documented, but they were identified through here. And I just took a little excerpt. What their race was, the sex, their age, their occupation, and how long that they were residents in the county. If you see the asterisk, that means that most likely those 4 households were all residents on the Bowles lot on the plot that was surveyed in 1822. So Stephen Bowles, Zachariah Bowles, Peter Bowles, and Reuben Cole were all living here in the Free State area. When they said mulatto, and I think all of you know that, that means that they were of African descent or Caucasian descent or European descent. So basically they were not completely African. If you see the one that they have is Negro, and that is Creddy Bowles or Critta Bowles. She was the wife of Zachariah Bowles. She'd been living in this area for 7 years when the census was taken. Critta Bowles Hemmings, or Critta Hemmings Bowles, she is the oldest sister of Sally Hemmings. And what happened was Zachariah Bowles probably had been friends to the younger Thomas Jefferson Randolph or to Francis Epps. He worked on Monticello as a laborer. He was paid for that during that time. So he basically met Critta during that time, and he wanted to marry her, and he was allowed to marry her, and the grandsons paid for her to be free so that she and Zachariah could get married. I'll hold that for a second. If you look and see, if you see it says PD and PS, the PD means that was Peter's daughter. The PS is Peter's son. Okay, so those are particular names that you might want to remember as I go through, because I'll share a little bit more about them. Now I'll talk about Dunlora and the Bowles plot. If you take a look at this map before I get started, you'll see right in the center is the Bowles lot. It surrounds Dunlora and the Belvedere area. As I mentioned earlier, that Major Thomas Carr had owned as much as 10,000 acres of the land that was given to him or granted to him by King George II, because back in those days, when the Europeans came, they saw land, they patented it, and they sent it back, and they said, this is what I want, and the king said, granted, it's yours, irrespective of the fact that somebody else might have lived there too. However, Thomas Carr passed to his son, John Carr, the first house that was built in Dunlora around 1735. There's no evidence that either John nor Thomas ever lived in Albemarle County. However, they owned that land, and so that's where their name was recorded. John Carr divided his property between his sons. He had 4 sons, Thomas Carr, Dabney, Samuel, and Garland. Samuel Carr was in the Navy, and he was given the Dunlora tract that became the first family residence on the property. Samuel Carr did die. He didn't have any children. He died in 1777. And then his property passed to his nephew, also named Samuel Carr. Samuel Carr, the nephew, divided his 1,000-acre tract between his 2 sons, George Carr, who inherited the Dunlora tract up here on the side. The map is kind of twisted, so I'll explain that in a minute, because when D.R. Goodman created this plot or map in 1844, this is how he drew it out. And he put that on the other side, even though from where I'm standing, Dunlora is to the east of me. Okay, is that right? I've moved. So it's on this side. Okay, I know it's somewhere around here. So Dunlora is on the other side of us. And then also James Carr. One of the things about it is that George sold his portion to his uncle William Dabney. Let's see, where am I here? Now he sold his portion to his uncle William Dabney, and as you can see right there in the middle of that lot, this is 1844. So Amy's 224 acres has now been shrunken to 93 and a half acres of land. And during that time, that's because throughout those years after she passed away and she left the land to her sons, Zachariah and to Thomas, Thomas sold his portions, and that helped to increase some of the land for the Carrs that they had, because he sold it to Samuel Carr and then on to the sons. In the 1844 plot there, it shows those 93 and a half acres sandwiched in between the Carr's land. And one of the things about it is that the road, I could barely find it, but the Free State Road kind of runs in between there all the way to the Bowles lot. And also the one thing about it is the road that runs along the northern side of Dunlora lands between what they call the Broad Mossine Ford that crosses the Rivanna River between Dunlora and Carsbrook. So that the road is continued, and that's what we call North Hydraulic Road and Rio Mills, to give you a perspective or a visual of where that is. Okay. Now, after the Civil War and toward the 19th century, a substantial group of African Americans migrated for better opportunities. In this area in Free State, though, as I mentioned earlier, it is a very kind of an enclosed area. So once you cross that bridge, you're in another community. The people over here basically brought and sold land, but for the most part, the Bowles, they sold their portions to different folks. As you can see up here, you'll see a gentleman named Henry Brown. There was George Terrell that owned some of the land. Also Wellington Bowles and Marcellus Wynn and Thomas Carter. William Carr and Henry Lewis all owned land. If you see the strip in between where you see John Spears and Hunter and Susie Brown, in 1910, when this plot was recorded, John Edward Spears is my great uncle, and he was the picture in the article. And Hunter and Susie Brown were my grandparents, and they lived in this area. And in 1910, John and Susie inherited the remaining portion of the land that was willed to them from their grandfather, Peter Bowles, who was also the nephew of Zachariah Bowles. So Susie kept her land. John said, I'm out of here. He sold it and moved across the road to Woodburn Road. I think several of you probably know where that is, over on the other side of Ryle Mills or Ryle Hill. He decided that he didn't want to stay in this area any longer, but he did come and visit us. I remember him as a child coming through the area to see us. But one of the things about it is that he wanted to move across, and the land that he had left down near Dunlora, it is now, somebody lives over on top of it, I'm sure. I don't know who does, but I'm sure somebody maybe in this room that lives on that property that he used to own. A total of 13 African-American households that comprised 56 individuals were identified in the Free State area in the 1910 census. So that means in the 1910, there were a lot of families who had quite a few children. But there was at least a 50% decline in the size of the community since 1900. That's because a lot of folks decided to move to the city or move north. And the residents of Free State that were left behind, as I mentioned, they were here, and some of them also sold their land and moved. Some of our family members also moved during that time, and they moved north to Maryland and New Jersey and, to Ohio and other places. So they were looking for better opportunities. Charlottesville at that time did have, in the rural communities, a lot of the rural areas still maintained their level of residence. This is the best I could do with this. I'm so sorry. Because as I started adding people, the little blocks got smaller. So I had to be a little creative and think about exactly how do I identify who owned what. So if you look at the very top corner, Amy Bowles bought this land in 1787, or 1788, excuse me. And she owned that land until she passed it on to her children. In the yellow, just follow the yellow lines because it'd be much easier for you to identify it. But she willed her land and left it to Zachariah Bowles and to Thomas Farrell. Thomas Farrell sold his land, and then Zachariah Bowles willed his land to his nephews, Peter Bowles and to Stephen Bowles. Stephen Bowles also took his portion of the land and he sold it to fulfill some financial obligations. And then you see Peter Bowles, he also married a woman named Lucy. When you're doing research, you probably noticed that there's a lot of Susans, a lot of Lucys, because a lot of people name their kids after themselves or, family members. So there's a lot of research of trying to sort out who belongs where, and you have to look at the dates because otherwise it's just mind-boggling. But Susan Bowles, as you remember in the 1833 census, she was 11 years old. Peter Bowles was only 3 years old during that time. So you see where Susan Bowles and married Andrew Jackson Spears, and they had 2 children, Lucy Jane Spears and John W. Spears. John Spears actually moved to Iowa because of opportunities out there working in the mines, and he married a woman named Anna Hawkins, and I do not have any record of if they had any children or not, but he died in 1899, and his portion of the land, of course, went to his sister, to Lucy Jane. Lucy Jane had 2 children, and if you notice here how the birth certificates used to work, if you do not see the name of someone beside them, that means that the fathers were not identified for the children. Lucy Jane, there is no indication of who my grandmother's father was, so I could not put a name there or even a block. But you know that she had to have a father. But John Spears married Annie Lincoln, And when he inherited the land in 1910, he and Susie both got their even split of about 7 3/4 acres of land. John Spears sold his, and he and Annie moved across the road. They had one son, John Spears, who was adopted. And during that time, I've been able to get some information, but they moved to Maryland. Susie Spears, on the other hand, my grandmother, their grandmother, she married Hunter Brown, who came out of Prophet. And there's a whole bunch of Browns. Anybody else in here by the name of Brown? Okay, so we might be related. But out of Prophet, there were a lot of Browns, and my grandfather and my grandmother met in Charlottesville, met and married in 1908, and they had 13 children. Okay, so that's why we needed a whole bunch of land. Unfortunately, I couldn't put everybody together. So if you look at the very top beside Susie Spears, you'll see two little names. One was Hunter and the other one was Daisy. Those were two children that died in infancy. So I put them up there because they did not live, they died in the year that they were born. But then I put across the bottom every single one of the other ones that were living children, and all the way from James Brown, the first one born in 1910, all the way to my Uncle Philip Brown that was born in 1935. So throughout all those years, they had several children. My sister here, Jacqueline, and my father had most of them, okay? Sorry, he had the most. But that's okay. Papa was a Rolling Stone. I'll put it that way. But we had a lot of fun living in Free State. When we were growing up, we had the whole area pretty much to ourselves, because when you came across that bridge, as I mentioned, that it was basically just us and a few other neighbors. When we were growing up, we had the Shavers, the Shiflets, the Sprouses, the Caissons, the Lowers, the Estes. Who else? I said the Lowers. So, but basically they came and went. We stayed. They moved in and moved out. And but all of them were white people. So we did not understand and know about racism and not all of the things that we see about today, because we went to their house, ate food with them. They came to our house. My grandmother cooked for them, and we slept overnight under the stars. We had a great time because we were enclosed. We had such a great time being in that environment. And so today, things have gotten a little bit bigger, and people, we kind of live on top of each other. So one of the things about it is that we had a great time when I was living here in the Free State area. These are some of our family members. So when we were growing up in my grandmother's house, and I'll show you a picture of it in just a minute, these people used to hang in the hallway. And we were like, okay, who are they? If you take a look at the dark photo above the ladies that are here, you can barely see them. What I was able to do is I was able to capture them and get a copy of them, and then I was able to get them digitally corrected or cleaned up. So as you can see, I am going to say that this woman is probably one of the Bowles, most likely Susan Bowles. And I'm going to say that this woman here is probably Lucy Jane Spears, and because she just looked like my sister. So I'm putting you on the spot. But I'm going to assume, because I do not know who they are. They were hanging in my grandmother's house. We asked, and she probably told us, but when you're a child and your grandparents tell you things, you probably only half listened. And I know that's probably what I did, is I half listened, because now I'm paying the price because I have no idea who they are. But these are some more family members. And just take a look at this man right here. Now, I want you to move your eyes over to the other side, and I want you to move your eyes to the other side. Is he looking at you? Because he did that to me when I was growing up. He used to hang in our hallway, and as I would walk by him, I would see these eyes, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, why is he watching me? But the very handsome man. We do not know who he is, but apparently he is part of our family, so I'm going to keep him. And also, this handsome gentleman in the center is probably one of the cars. Even though the cars were mostly white, we did have some African-American cars or mulatto cars that were related to us. And so we concluded that we've given him a name. His name is Guy Carr. So he gets to keep that. And the other young lady on the other side, I have no idea who she is, but she's a very beautiful woman. And she was also hanging in our living room when we were growing up in my grandmother's house. So all these people and all these pictures, I was able to capture them and to get them cleaned up, and they are part of our family history forever. So if they're not related, so bad. We're stuck with them. No, they're family, I'm sure. These are some of the structures that were in Free State. And if you notice, this picture down here is a picture of a house that basically I was able to capture. These are mostly how the houses looked in Free State back in the 17 and 1800s, okay? So you kind of see what they look like. This house was still standing in 2008 when the Rivanna Archaeology Project excavated the Belvedere area. So this house was torn down, and I have a better picture of it that my cousin took to show the back of the house that was still standing. And we know that the Sprouses used to live in that house before it was torn down. And this house over here on the corner where you see the gentleman with the tree, that was my grandmother's house. We grew up in that house. This house had no running water, had no bathroom, because back in those days, back in the early 1900s, most houses were built for, and they had kitchens and they had outhouses that were detached. And this is one of the reasons why I do not use porta-johns today. Can't do it. Freak me out. But in this house, it was 4 rooms, and the kitchen, we always stayed in the kitchen. That was the best place in the house. But this handsome gentleman that's standing in the front is my uncle. He was married to my Aunt Lula, who was the 12th child of my grandmother and grandfather. So that was my Uncle Kearney, our Uncle Kearney, and he looks pretty cool, doesn't he? He's out there pretty stylish. But my grandmother's house back in those days, you really didn't get a 2-story house. And so my grandmother and grandfather bought that house, and they had 13 children in it. Most of the houses were built of wood and or the house had shingles. If you see that house up there, you'll see they've got these giant, look like asphalt or some type of tarp. That whole house was built like that. And so the roof had shingles, but also the roof had shingles on the outside. During the excavation at Belvedere, there were 6 structures that were found during the excavation to include what they call a colored school. The school was a 2-room schoolhouse that my grandmother went to, and back in those days, the 8th grade was considered senior, being a high schooler. So she completed the 8th grade during that time, and the school is, if I can get my directional right, it is southeast of us, and there is a pathway that runs between my cousin's property and where the school is, and it's just a walkway now and a walk path, but it's also, they discovered that during the excavation that the only thing that's left there now is just the foundation. But most of the African Americans or the free African Americans that lived in Free State were educated amongst themselves. They were not given a teacher, and they didn't go to public school like we go to today. Even as late as my relatives, my aunts and my uncles, they also went to school across Ryle Road into what they call now is the little thrift store, the Albemarle Training School. That's where they went to school and got their education, their formal education. Is right across the road on 29. Okay, so this is about Belvedere. Belvedere, the only thing that I remember before I left and went into the military was from my cousin's house. You could look across the street and there were a bunch of trees. As children, we used to run through the woods and play out there, swing like Tarzan and Jane and do all kinds of fun things. But today, it's a residential area. So, but in 1903, nearly 300 acres was sold by the Moons to Wood Stockton, whose family owned Carsbrook. And so by 2014, as you can see, these individuals up here, they were part of the dedication ceremony. And you'll see behind them the Bowles Homestead and Cemetery, because when the excavation happened around 2007 or so, they found a headstone of Mary Bowles. And I'll talk a little bit about her in a minute. But this woman on my right is Marion Bowles Anderson. The gentleman in the middle is my uncle Philip Brown and his wife Barbara. So they were all part of the dedication that occurred in 2014, and also mostly responsible for making sure that this was identified as a historical society. I put a little bit of a link here because I wanted to show you what this link looked like today. Skip there. See if it pops up. It may not. You probably already know, maybe. See if it shows. No, it's not going to show. That's okay. And as you can see, Mary Bowles died in 1882. And over here on the other side is the Brown Cemetery. When the Browns Cemetery was a private cemetery, and at the time that we lived here and were growing up, the only people that were in that cemetery were our family members. However, around 2003 or 2005, Robert Hauser, who was the developer of Stonehouse Development, coordinated with my Uncle Philip and was able to put in this cemetery over on your left side there some stones. And those stones represent every single one of the members or the numbers of individuals that they found in Dunlora when they were doing their excavation. And they did not disturb the actual graves, but what they did is they put the stones in there to represent the number of people that they found that were over there. So they did not move the bodies. I'm sorry if your house is on top of them, but that's a possibility because I have not been over there to see, but I can't even find it now. But I do know that those stones are there to represent the individuals that were there. And some of them were the Terrells, the Coles, I believe the Winds, the cars, some of the cars over there that were part of that, those stones to represent them. And we have no idea who they were, but they were there. Now, Mary Bowles on the other side, Mary Bowles is an interesting character because when she was part of the 1833 census, which is really cool because during that time she was 5 years old. And she was actually Mary Farrell during that time. And even though that the gravesite was discovered during the excavation at Belvedere, this is one of the things that is the reason why you have that dedication there, is because they were able to find one headstone, but also if you see here, there were several of these smaller stones that they also found that indicated that there were some individuals that were buried in that area. And this whole area that's over there now was the Bowles Cemetery. It's also believed that Amy Bowles Farrell lived there and died there. However, we do not have any markings of her being in that area or being buried there. But the woman that I showed you a minute ago, let me go back here. This woman here is the granddaughter of Mary Bowles. Her father was Joseph Bowles, and he had 17 children. She was the last one. She was born in 1931. She's still alive today, thank God, but she should be about 90 years old. So she was she is the last living child of Joseph Bowles that is still living today. And Mary Bowles is her grandmother. All right, I think I've talked enough. What do you think? I also want to say thank you to the center at Belvedere, because without Holly meeting my cousin Mary and without Carolyn agreeing to host this event for us, I would not be able to share with you today. And I'm hoping that I was able to give you some information that you can take back with you. And I hope it was informative. But I'm open for questions if anybody has any. Yes, back there in the.
Oh my gosh. Who did Hunter Brown marry again?
Excuse me?
Who did Hunter from Prophet marry again?
He married my grandmother, Susie Spears.
Okay, let me write down. See, Hunter said because we're related. Don't.
Yes.
Doctor all over. There's Benjamin Brown.
Right, exactly. But just to kind of give you a little bit of history, she asked the question. Hunter Brown came out of Prophet, and you know where Prophet is located, right? Okay, good, because if I have to describe it, not living in this area, it could be a little difficult. All I'm gonna say is up the road, but it's a nice home. I'm sorry, who's first? You?
My question is about that home over in the back of Dunlora that has a sort of road. Thank you. The Dunlora Farm Road. You know, when it gets to the end, there's that house, and the outside says 1735-ish. And I believe the house actually burned in the
Yes, it did.
1800s.
In 1916.
So can you talk about the history of that house and who lived there? And
The individuals that lived in that house was John and Marion Moon. They lived in that house. And so John and Marion Moon, they lived in that house, and it burned down in 1916.
Okay, and were they your relatives?
No, they were part of the Carr. They belonged to the Carr's side of the Dunlora. I believe, if I get my history right, let me go back here and give you that information, because I did write it. Okay, here we go.
And I guess I would like to know if it was a working plantation.
In Dunlora, it was a working plantation. Yes, it was. However, Free State, where the free African Americans lived, they were farmers, domestic help, but they were not part of the Dunlora plantation. Amy Bowles Farrell, she lived in the Dunlora area for about 10 years before William Johnson sold her the property, but that property was exclusively the Bowles plot, and it was not part of Dunlora. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, you're welcome.
Off the beaten track, but how did Rio Road get to? Oh, hello. Good heart test. How did Rio Road get to be pronounced Rio instead of Rio? And the second question is, how did Seminole Trail get its name? Because there are no Seminole Indians in Virginia, I think.
I'm going to have to defer that question to someone who knows how Rio got their name. I am not sure, but
I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I've always been told.
I am not sure, but I can definitely find out for you, and I can send that information back to Carolyn, and she can make sure that you get it.
You've referenced several times the wooden bridge and the road into Free State, so I'm not familiar with that. Where would that be?
Okay, from where you are right now, and if you drive up the street here, I think am I in the front of the, oh, okay. You drive up this way. I'm directionally challenged because I haven't lived here in a while. But if you drive up the street and you see Fairview swimming pool, to your left is a wooden bridge. It is a one-lane bridge, and that is what we call, when you come across that bridge, you are in a community of a separate community from everybody else. You're welcome. In the very back, oh.
Parish?
Fredericksville Parish.
What, how much larger did that encompass of Free State? Or is that basically Free State?
It was not, Fredericksville Parish was not only just Free State, it was part of Albemarle County. So it was not exclusively part of Free State, but when I mentioned Fredericksville Parish, that was the name of the parish that encompassed the Free State and the Dunlora area. And that's where the reason why they did the 1833 census is because they were trying to capture all of the names of all of the free blacks that lived in that area.
Got it, thank you.
And Dunlora on Shepherd's Ridge Road.
Excuse me?
There's a cemetery across from my house. Do you know anything about that cemetery? It's enclosed with a fence.
Oh, that is our family cemetery. That's the one that I mentioned that was on the left side, the brown cemetery. That is the private cemetery.
It's a private cemetery, yes.
Yes, and that is our family cemetery.
Oh, I wondered because we never see anyone go in there. It's
Well, the long story is that, how can I explain this? The long story is that it was an agreement between my Uncle Philip Brown and Robert Hauser to build an access point for the family to go and to take care of the grave site. However, somewhere along the line, they built a house a little bit too close to the cemetery, and now we have to walk through someone's property to go there. I was there just the other day. I hate to walk in somebody's house or yard to go to the cemetery, but it still belongs to us, so sorry.
well, I'm glad to know somebody goes there because I'm right across the road.
Yes, ma'am. We do go there. We have someone that's maintaining the property and trying to keep it up for us because you know, several of us do not actually live in the area anymore. And my cousin Mary and my cousin James and my aunt, they still live in there, but they're a little older and they're not going to go down there to mow anything.
My neighbor lives next to the cemetery and she says she has a ghost in her house.
Oh.
She calls him Captain somebody.
Captain somebody?
Yeah.
Well, I do have an uncle that served in the Marines, so I hope it's not him.
So I have two questions. First of all, are you talking about the cemetery that's fenced on Free State Road?
Yes.
Okay, well, I live right there, and you're welcome to go through that property anytime.
Thank you.
and I actually only own to the edge of my house, so there's some common property down there because it's a beautiful site. But anyway, but my question is, in the back of Belvedere, there's a beautiful white farmhouse.
Yes.
That I've heard is going to be torn down. Do you know anything about that house?
That property belongs to a family by the name of Levistons. They have owned that property for as long as I've been in this area. And apparently Mr. Leviston passed away a few years ago. And so that his children have decided to go ahead and sell that. So most likely it's going to expand the Belvedere area.
Actually, I think Belvedere bought it a couple years ago.
Oh, okay. Then that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah. So related to the Brown Cemetery, around the corner from that is ruins. Is that the foundation of the schoolhouse?
No, that is actually the house that we had a cousin that used to live in it. His name was Benjamin Carr. And that piece of it, if that's still there, that's where he used to live. And the school is directly in front of his house. So you may not see where the school is, but if you see his ruins, then look to the west of him, of that house, and that's where the school used to be. Great, I'm glad it's still there. Yes.
You know, what happened from a historical standpoint, what happened during the Civil War in this area? You had the free blacks that lived in this area, then you had the plantations with blacks under slavery. I mean, what went on before, during, and after as the transition culturally took place?
Well, basically, during the Civil War, and we have had relatives that that were involved in the Civil War. However, I do not have all of the names that were there, but we do know we have some, and we're still researching that. I finally got connected to a group just right before I came here that are working on the colored troops for the Civil War. So I'll be able to get some of that information, but I do know that during the Civil War, this area was pretty much in a cocoon. I want to say it that way. It was kind of away from or out of the hidden path. So it wasn't involved in the actual things that were going on, even though there were, from what I understand through history, is that there was a little skirmish on Rio Hill. But we were not involved in that particular area. Now, after the Civil War, what happened is a lot of our family that were in the Free State area moved. And a few of them stayed, but throughout that time, the few that stayed, they stayed because they didn't want to leave the property. But those that moved on, they went on and sold their property and moved away. Question?
Hi, I'm a former educator, not from this area. I've only lived here for 2 years. I'm just curious if this is history that's taught to students here?
No, it's not, unfortunately. When I was growing up and we were growing up in the Charlottesville area, we got history of Jamestown, Williamsburg, Thomas Jefferson, but we did not get anything about the history of Free State and the free African Americans that lived in this area.
Any way that we can encourage that to happen?
Yes, I've gotten connected to a group that is actually working very closely right now on creating the slave laborers that worked at UVA. So they're working on a project right now, and Diane Brown Towns, who's behind you there, is one of the individuals that are working on that project. And I actually got connected to her just a few weeks ago, and so we've been talking about it. And so there should be some more things coming out. There's also on the Jefferson Madison Library on the 17th of June, they're going to have a Zoom meeting that are going to talk about some of the African-American laborers around the Charlottesville UVA area. So there'll be an opportunity to sign up. You can sign up for free. Just go to the Jefferson Madison Library site, and on there, there's a link for you to sign up. Yes. Diane, can I ask that question from you?
I just wondered if, excuse me, if the Jefferson School Center, which is there on East Jefferson, on 4th Street, is that helping with the history of your family as well? I know they're trying to incorporate lots of the history of it, especially Vinegar Hill, because that's where they're located, but I didn't know if they were expanding out into the county as well.
I don't think so, not.
Slavery in Albemarle County, and it talks about the Carr family, so it does incorporate some of that history. And people in the city and the county, if you were in the period of segregation, you normally went to what they would call colored schools or Albemarle Training School. And we definitely, Jefferson School is definitely, I was the first class to desegregate the Charlottesville public schools, the class of '66, because every child from around the city of Charlottesville was thrown together in that year in that school. So what they are doing is incorporating African Americans' history. A wide net of history is unfolding.
And I also think that one of the neat things about it, because I think you're also asking, is this area, the information from Amy Bowles Farrell included into the Jefferson Center. It's beginning to, so that's good. And I will supply. Okay, and I will supply some of this information to them so that they can also help to make this more visible, because it is important to give voice to the voiceless. And the thing is that Amy was, you know, indentured. She made a way out of no way, to make it a little bit of a simple phrase. But what she did is she built an opportunity for her children, not realizing that we would be talking about this today. So this is one of the great things about it, is that the one thing that I enjoy, or that I'm happy to see, is that this has now been recognized as a historical area. And so it is one of the things that I know that the Historical Society is working on, is identifying some of those areas that free slaves lived, or even African-American slaves enslaved, that are here in this area, and recognizing that and bringing it forward. So we've got an intern here that is working with the Historical Society. So she is trying to learn a lot, and we're going to be relying on her too. So she'll be able to help us out.
Will we be able to have access to that through the center?
I will definitely make sure that you'll have access through the center for it, yes.
And the second thing is, in Free State, did you know or have any connection with Ivy Creek and what was going on over there?
Ivy Creek?
Ivy Creek.
I am not sure, no. That is. Oh, the Hugh. Oh, no, I'm not aware of that. But I'm sure I'm gonna get it, because I've got a connection back there. My head has been filled up with all kinds of things, so it's been a lot. Okay, any other questions? Oh. I'm sorry? Cobham, oh, Cobham area. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The Hugh cars? Okay. I apologize, because I haven't lived in Virginia for quite some time. It's been, I hate to say it like this, but it's been like 40 years. But that's only because I decided to go join the military, and then I moved away, and it's, you know, the only way that I've been able to keep connection is through my family and through research. So I apologize if I don't have all the information, but my armchair genealogy work is working, I think. Another question? Yes.
My maiden name is Clark, so I'm always interested in trying to find out, you know, about my genealogy. And with the Hugh Carr Foundation, or it's now the Ivy Creek Foundation, which is right off Earlsville Road. Okay. I think at that time they owned like 200 some acres of property. So my niece is trying to, you know, wiggle through the Carr genealogy. So I don't know if I'm in akin to you all or the Carrs over there, but someone said that somewhere along the way we're probably kin. We just have to find that connection. And my family is, well, my grandmother and all of them were from the Earlsville area.
Well, we probably have some connection, and to be honest with you, if you are born and raised in Virginia, we're probably all connected. Yeah. But yes, and we can connect you to, I've done a lot of research through Family Search.